I never planned on moving to Oak Ridge Estates. It wasn't exactly my scene. Too many neatly trimmed hedges. Too many people who cared way too much about mailboxes being the exact same shade of beige. But when my great-uncle passed away and left me his house, it seemed like a no-brainer. Free place to live? Hell yes. Property values through the roof? Even better. What I didn't account for was the HOA. Or, more specifically, Karen McAllister. She was the self-appointed dictator of Oak Ridge Estates, a woman in her mid-50s with the sharpest bob haircut I'd ever seen and an even sharper tongue. The kind of person who wore a cardigan like it was battle armor and carried a clipboard everywhere, as if she was personally responsible for keeping the neighborhood in check. From the moment I arrived, Karen had it out for me. I barely had time to unpack before she was at my door, smiling that tight, disapproving smile. "You must be the new homeowner," she said, looking me up and down like I was something she scraped off her shoe. "I assume you've read the HOA guidelines." I blinked. I skimmed them. Wrong answer. Karen's lips thinned. Skimming is not reading. "We have very strict policies here, Mr. Reynolds." "Oh, call me Jake." I gave her my most charming smile. Didn't work. She just sniffed, like I'd offended her delicate suburban sensibilities. "Well, Jake, as president of the HOA, it's my duty to ensure everyone follows the rules. We like to keep Oak Ridge Estates a certain kind of neighborhood." A certain kind of neighborhood? What the hell was that supposed to mean? She handed me a folder stuffed full of documents. "I suggest you familiarize yourself with these. There will be an inspection at the end of the month." I didn't know it at the time, but that wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. The first fine arrived 3 days later. I found the bright pink notice taped aggressively to my front door. Violation: lawn height exceeds HOA standards. Fine, $50. I stood there, staring at my perfectly normal lawn. It was maybe a little shaggy, but this was the middle of summer. Grass grew. That was its job. I shrugged it off and mowed the lawn that afternoon. But then, 2 days later. Violation: trash cans not properly stowed. Fine, $75. I kept my trash cans at the side of the house, just like every other neighbor. What was the issue? Then another. Violation: unauthorized vehicle in driveway. Fine, $100. That unauthorized vehicle was my own damn car. At this point, I was starting to sense a pattern. And that pattern's name was Karen. I tried to be civil. I really did. I even went to the next HOA meeting, thinking maybe I could smooth things over. Bad idea. Karen ran the meeting like a general commanding an army of suburban foot soldiers. Every time I tried to speak, she cut me off with a tight-lipped smile and a dismissive wave. "I understand you're new here, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But rules are rules. If we start making exceptions, everything falls apart." "What exception?" I demanded. "I just want to know why I'm getting fined every other day for things no one else is dealing with." Karen's eyes narrowed. Perhaps because no one else is violating the rules. That was complete bullshit. I'd walked around the neighborhood. Other people had cars in their driveways, trash cans in the same spot as mine, and lawns that weren't manicured to perfection. This wasn't about the rules. This was about me. And I had no idea why. Then came the violation that nearly sent me over the edge. Violation: unauthorized structure on property. Fine, $500. I stared at the notice, utterly baffled. What unauthorized structure? And then I saw it. A shed. A brand new shed that I did not build, sitting in the corner of my backyard like it had always been there. I stormed over to Karen's house, my patience long gone. She answered the door with a smug little smile. "I see you got the notice," she said sweetly. I gritted my teeth. "I didn't put that shed there." "Really?" She feigned surprise. "Well, it's on your property, so it's your responsibility. And unauthorized structures result in a fine. If it's not removed within the next 48 hours, we'll have to escalate the matter." She didn't say how she'd escalate it, but I had a bad feeling. So, I did the only thing I could do. I grabbed a sledgehammer and tore the damn thing down myself. That should have been the end of it. But of course, Karen wasn't done. The next morning, 2 uniformed security officers from the HOA showed up at my door. "Yes," I said, crossing my arms. One of them, a burly guy with sunglasses, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, You've been reported for destruction of property. I blinked. My own property. Karen appeared behind them, arms crossed smugly. That shed was part of an ongoing community improvement project. By demolishing it, you've committed an act of vandalism. I laughed out loud. Karen's expression turned icy. If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. I grinned. Go right ahead. Because Karen didn't know something very important, and she was about to make a very big mistake. Karen really thought she had me cornered. She stood there, arms crossed, flanked by her two glorified mall cops, looking like she had personally just won the war on crime. The HOA security officers were trying to look intimidating, but it was hard to take them seriously when they were wearing khaki shorts. Last chance, Mr. Reynolds, Karen said, her voice full of smug satisfaction. Either you come quietly, or we escalate this matter to the real police. I could barely contain my laughter. Come quietly? Am I under arrest or something? Sunglasses guy puffed out his chest. As HOA security, we have the right to detain residents for violations. I raised an eyebrow. Do you, though? Karen cut in before he could answer. You destroyed community property. That's a serious offense. I took a slow, exaggerated look at my empty backyard, where the community property in question had been turned into a pile of splintered wood. Well, since the community didn't pay for it, build it, or even know it existed, I don't see how that's your problem. Karen's eyes flashed with irritation. You're trespassing in our neighborhood, Mr. Reynolds. And you're making a habit of ignoring the rules. That made me pause. Trespassing? I live here, I said slowly, trying to process her audacity. Karen smiled, sickly sweet. That's debatable. Oh, there it was. This wasn't just about petty fines. Karen didn't want me here. At all. And I was starting to realize why. She wanted me gone. Before I could call out her bullshit, the HOA rent-a-cops stepped forward. Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to take you in, sunglasses guy said, reaching for my arm. Oh, hell no. I yanked my arm back. Touch me again, and I'll have you arrested for assault. Karen let out a dramatic gasp, like I had just threatened her personally. Did you hear that? He's being aggressive. This is exactly why we need stricter rules in this neighborhood. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Karen, I swear to God. That's when I heard the sirens. I turned to see two actual police cars pulling up in front of my house. Not HOA security, not Karen's clipboard-wielding minions, real law enforcement. Karen, to my surprise, smiled. Ah, finally, she sighed, as if she had personally summoned them with her sheer willpower. Now we can deal with this properly. I folded my arms. Yeah, let's. The first officer stepped out of his vehicle. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a very familiar uniform. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. Karen, still in full smug mode, marched up to the officer and launched into her speech. Officer, thank God you're here. We have a very serious issue. This man, she pointed at me dramatically, has been vandalizing community property, ignoring HOA laws, and threatening security officers. I demand he be removed immediately. I watched the officer's face carefully, waiting for the moment. And then it did. His eyes met mine. A slow, almost amused smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Because standing right there, badge gleaming, was my older brother, Officer Luke Reynolds. And Karen had just screwed up big time. Luke's smile was subtle, just enough for me to catch, but not enough for Karen to realize she had just walked into a disaster. I crossed my arms and leaned back against my porch railing, waiting for the fireworks. Karen, completely oblivious, kept going. This man, she huffed, jabbing a finger in my direction, has been a menace to our community since the day he arrived. He refuses to follow the HOA guidelines, and when we tried to enforce them, he attacked security officers. Luke glanced at the two HOA security guys, who suddenly looked a lot less confident now that a real cop was here. Luke raised an eyebrow. Attacked? Sunglasses guy cleared his throat. Well, not attacked, exactly, but he refused to comply with HOA security orders. Luke blinked. I see. And those orders were? Karen cut in before Sunglasses guy could dig a deeper hole. We were detaining him for property destruction. He illegally demolished a community structure. That's a serious violation, officer. I expect you to handle this properly. I couldn't help myself. Yeah, Luke. Handle this properly. Karen froze. The first flicker of doubt crossed her face. Luke exhaled slowly and took a step forward. Mr. Reynolds. Karen looked smugger than ever. Can you explain what exactly happened here? Oh, I was more than happy to explain. I pointed to my yard. A few days ago, I received a fine for an unauthorized structure. Only problem? I never built a structure. Karen's lips thinned. I continued. So imagine my surprise when I found a random shed in my backyard. No one asked me. No one told me. But I was expected to pay a fine for it. Luke nodded, looking unimpressed. Go on. So, I did what any homeowner would do. I tore it down. Karen gasped like I had confessed to burning down an orphanage. See, he admitted it, she shrieked. He vandalized community property. Arrest him. Luke pinched the bridge of his nose. Karen. Oh, so you know him? Karen interrupted, eyes narrowing. Luke sighed. Yeah, Karen. I know him. She crossed her arms, looking suddenly suspicious. How? Luke gave me a long, measured look. Then he smiled. He's my brother. I swear, if Karen had been drinking something, she would have done the most dramatic spit take of her life. Her jaw dropped, then snapped shut, then dropped again. Luke might as well have told her I was the president of the United States. You're related? She finally managed. Yep. I grinned. And he's been hearing all about you. Karen's face went from pale white to furious red in 2 seconds flat. Luke turned to the HOA security guys. And just to be clear, you two tried to detain my brother? Sunglasses guy took a cautious step back. It was Karen's call. Karen whipped around to glare at him, but it was too late. He had just thrown her under the bus. Luke exhaled sharply, looking genuinely irritated now. Okay, here's what's gonna happen. Nobody in an HOA has the authority to detain anyone. That's illegal. Second, if this shed wasn't built by my brother, then who did build it? Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Well, the HOA, obviously. Luke nodded. Great. And did the HOA get his permission before putting it on his property? Karen hesitated. Luke smiled. Yeah, that's what I thought. She tried to recover. But the fines, the violations. He's refused to comply with the HOA's regulations. Luke raised an eyebrow. Are these violations real? And there it was. The real question. I could see the exact moment Karen realized she was screwed. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Because she knew, we knew, that if Luke started digging, he'd find way more than just fake fines. Luke let the silence stretch. Then he turned to me. Jake, would you like to press charges for harassment? Karen choked. Karen made a noise somewhere between a squeak and a cough, like a malfunctioning robot. See charges? She stammered, her confidence shattering before my eyes. Luke nodded. Yeah. Harassment, fraud, attempted unlawful detainment. Should I keep going? The HOA security guys immediately took another step back, clearly wanting no part in whatever this was turning into. I crossed my arms and pretended to think about it. Well, I don't know, Luke. Do you think a judge would be interested in a case where an HOA tried to intimidate a homeowner? Luke smirked. I'd say so, especially if there's a pattern of fake fines and fabricated violations. Karen blanched. That's ridiculous. The HOA is just upholding community standards. If he refuses to follow them, that's his problem. Luke turned to me. Jake, do you have proof that other residents haven't been fined for the same things? I grinned. Oh, I sure do. See, after about the 5th bogus violation, I started keeping records. Photos, timestamps, copies of notices, or, in the case of my neighbor Bob, lack of notices. Bob had the same exact trash can placement as me. No fines. Bob had an even taller lawn than I ever did. No fines. Bob parked his car in his driveway every single day. No fines. Why? Because Bob wasn't me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the evidence. Here's my car in the driveway. Here's Bob's. I got fined, he didn't. Here's my trash can. Here's Bob's. Same placement, same day. I got fined, he didn't. Here's my lawn. Here's Bob's. Luke let out a low whistle. Wow, that's a lot of selective enforcement. Karen snapped. That proves nothing, she shrieked, her face almost purple with rage. The HOA has the right to issue fines at our discretion. If you don't like it, move. Boom. There it was. She said the quiet part out loud. Luke tilted his head. So, you're admitting that this was targeted? Karen's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. She had no way out. Then, as if things couldn't get worse for her, other neighbors started showing up. See, when two cop cars roll into a quiet suburban neighborhood, people notice. And when those people had also been dealing with Karen's HOA dictatorship, they got curious. My next-door neighbor, Sarah, stepped onto her porch. Hey, what's going on? I smiled. Oh, just exposing some HOA corruption. Sarah's eyes lit up. Oh, finally. A few more neighbors gathered. Bob included. Bob, who had never been fined a day in his life. Karen looked around, realizing, too late, that she was losing control. Everyone, go home, she snapped. This is an HOA matter, and it's being handled. Bob scratched his chin. An HOA matter? Looks more like a police matter. Karen looked like she wanted to explode. Luke, enjoying himself at this point, turned to the crowd. Has anyone else received fines for things that don't make sense? Half the neighborhood immediately started talking. Oh, I got fined for a garden gnome. She charged me $200 because my mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. She threatened to tow my car for parking in my own driveway. Luke whistled. Wow, that's a lot of complaints. Karen's eye twitched. You can't. This is an internal community matter. Luke gave her a level look. No, Karen. This is fraud. And then he reached for his radio. I think it's time we have an official investigation into this HOA, Luke said, clicking his radio on. Karen lost it. You can't do this, she shrieked, stepping forward aggressively. This is my neighborhood. You can't just. Luke held up a hand. Karen, I'm going to need you to take a step back. She ignored him. I have worked too hard to keep this place perfect, she spat. And I won't let some punk and his corrupt cop brother ruin everything. Luke's expression hardened. Karen McAllister, he said, voice suddenly cold. You're dangerously close to interfering with a police investigation. I suggest you back off. Karen froze. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't her usual power trip. She wasn't dealing with an HOA fine. She wasn't dealing with some scared homeowner. She was dealing with the actual law. And she was losing. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Karen didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The power she had wielded so smugly over the neighborhood was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. Luke, still holding his radio, stared her down. Karen, I'm going to ask you one more time. Step back. Karen's jaw clenched. Her hands balled into fists. She looked at me, then at Luke, then at the crowd of neighbors who were no longer on her side. Then, finally, she took a single step back. Luke exhaled sharply and lowered his radio. Smart choice. But Karen wasn't done yet. She turned to the crowd, desperation creeping into her voice. Are you all seriously going to take his side? I've dedicated years to making this neighborhood perfect. And this outsider, thinks he can waltz in and ruin everything? He doesn't belong here. And there it was again. I folded my arms. What's your problem, Karen? You've been targeting me since the moment I moved in. And for what? Because I don't fit your little vision of a perfect neighborhood? Karen sneered. You're nothing but a freeloader. You didn't earn that house. You just got it handed to you. And people like you never respect the rules. The crowd went dead silent. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged glances. That was the moment everyone realized this had nothing to do with HOA rules. Karen just didn't want me here. Luke shook his head. Wow, that's what this is about. You're running people out of the neighborhood because you don't think they deserve their homes. Karen scoffed. Oh, please. I was just trying to maintain standards. Bob finally spoke up. You weren't maintaining standards, Karen. You were running a scam. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sarah nodded. Yeah. How many people sold their houses because they were drowning in fines? Another voice. I heard what happened to the Parkers. She hit them with so many violations they had no choice but to move. Luke's expression darkened. Sounds like we have a pattern of behavior. Karen's face went from red to ghostly pale. I didn't. But it was too late. The neighbors, her neighbors, were finally seeing her for what she was. Bob turned to the crowd. Who here actually voted for Karen to be HOA president? Silence. Then Sarah frowned. Wait, I don't think there's been an HOA election in years. Luke's eyebrows shot up. Karen, when's the last time you held a legitimate HOA election? Karen visibly panicked. That's not how it works. I was just. Bob grinned. Uh-huh, that's what I thought. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, I motioned to remove Karen McAllister as HOA president. Karen gasped. You can't. Sarah's hand shot up. I second that motion. And just like that, every single hand in the crowd went up. Karen let out a strangled noise. You can't do this. I am the HOA. Bob smirked. Not anymore, you're not. The next few days were glorious. Karen tried to fight it, of course. She threatened lawsuits, screamed about unfair treatment, and even tried to declare herself HOA president again. Didn't work. The newly reformed HOA launched an investigation into every fine she had ever issued. Turned out she had been pocketing a lot of that money. The HOA removed her from power permanently. Then, to top it all off, she got hit with actual legal trouble. Fraud, harassment, and attempted unlawful detainment. She didn't go to jail, but she did get sued by multiple homeowners, including me. She ended up selling her house just to cover her legal fees. And when the for sale sign went up, the entire neighborhood celebrated. A few weeks later, as I was watering my now perfectly acceptable lawn, a familiar police cruiser pulled up. Luke stepped out, smirking. So, how's the neighborhood dictator-free life? I grinned. Peaceful. No random sheds. No psychotic fines. Just me and my overgrown lawn. Luke laughed. Well, if you ever need backup again, you know who to call. I just smiled. Because now, Karen was gone. Oak Ridge Estates belonged to the homeowners again. And that was the best thing that could have happened to this neighborhood. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.